In the previous discussions, we discussed about BDD in general, how we write a feature file and different combinations of given, when, and then with different data types. Let's start this session with how we can use tags in our feature files. We can apply a tag on scenarios, on feature, or a scenario outline. However, we don't have a scenario outline here, but we'll be having feature sessions and we'll discuss the tag on those as well. So I'll put a tag here. Say, for example, we have a tag for nightly build. And on this one, we have, say, smoke test. And we have nightly build and coverage. Once we have the tags on our feature files or scenarios, we will go back to our test case runner and then we'll specify the tags here. This can take multiple, so we'll start with the curly braces, and inside those we'll provide the tag @nightly build. So this will only run the test cases which are tagged with nightly build. So in this we got 2 scenarios and 7 steps. Let's see which all scenarios we tagged this nightly build tag. So nightly build is with add an employee flavor 1 and add an employee flavor 3. But in the output we don't see much, so let's add one more option, that is plugin pretty. This will do is it will show us the scenarios this test case has executed. We got scenarios as well matching those tags, so from here we can verify. So it ran 2 test cases and 7 steps. We can have multiple combinations here. We can use and, or, and not. So we will discuss those quickly. So if I want to run nightly build and coverage test, so this will only run one scenario, which is this. Let's run it. Right, we got one scenario, 4 steps, which is add an employee with flavor 3. And if I want to run all the test cases but not the coverage test, so I'll put a not before @coverage test tag, and this will execute all the tags but @coverage test. Now we can see here we got @nightly build and smoke test. Let's discuss more on the tags. We discussed about the and. We can also put or clause here. This will run all the scenarios which are tagged with @nightly build or @smoke test. So let's execute it. So we have got 3 scenarios. We'll see why. So first one is nightly, that is right. We got smoke, and the third scenario is tagged with @nightly. That is why we have got 3 scenarios running. Yes, we discussed tags using and, or, and not on the tags. So using those, we can play around with which tags we want to execute or which scenarios or features we want to execute. Look closely in the console, we are getting the junk characters as well. So take it off. We can use another attribute for Cucumber options, that is monochrome. Now this gives us the formatted response without any special characters. So we can see all the scenarios with much more clarity. Tags helps us filter the specific scenarios or feature to be run based on the requirement. Suppose we want to issue a nightly build and we do not want coverage test to be run. We can use Maven options in our Jenkins command that will skip the features or the scenarios tagged with coverage. Let's go to terminal and see how we can use that. Maven test -d cucumber.options. Here we specify the tags. This will override the tag that we have specified in our test runner file. @coverage. So we discussed that we don't want to run, so we'll do not coverage. So this will run 2 scenarios. As we discussed, it ran the one with nightly build and another with smoke test and did not run the coverage test. So we can use this option in our Jenkins build where we will skip the test cases which are taking more time in releasing or issuing a build. There is another option which is dry run. By default it is false. We can set it to true. It tells Cucumber not to run any test definition. This just verifies if the scenario steps are mapped to any of the step definition. If it is not, it will fail. Let's give it a run with this option. It did not execute any of the scenarios here. We can verify by putting a constructor in step definition. Now let's run with dry run option and see if any of the scenarios are getting executed. See, we do not get any constructor log because with dry run option as true, it is not executing any of the step definition. It is just verifying if the step definitions are mapped to a given feature of the scenarios. If I make it false or if I remove it and try to run, then we will see the constructor log in our console log. We can see the constructor log here for each scenario. Let's talk about the background. Background defines the steps which run before the execution of each scenario in a feature file. Background is syntactically similar to a scenario and has the same test steps as scenarios. Let's copy one scenario and we can put one here, rename it to background, and it can have the same when and then steps like we had for scenario. Background does is it executes before the execution of each scenario. So we have 3 scenarios here, so it will execute 3 times before the execution of every scenario. Let's give it a run. Now here for each scenario we'll have 6 steps. So for scenario add an employee, we have got these comes from background and these comes from the scenario. For the next one, first 3 comes from background and last 4 comes from the scenario, that is the flavor 2. Similarly for the flavor 3. Now let's talk about Cucumber hooks. In JUnit testing framework we have before and after, before class and after class. On the same lines in Cucumber hooks we have the same annotations for before and after. Let's define a package and we will define a class which will hold our before and after hooks. We need to have this @before annotation from IO Cucumber Java instead of org JUnit. In the same lines we'll have the after. Let's put a sys out so that we understand the flow of the execution. Let's execute this test case runner and let's analyze what we got. So it executed one test case annotated with tags smoke test, since we are running only one tag, that is smoke test, and it was tagged to scenario with flavor 2, and we executed a before hook and then our step definition constructor. Then we have 3 steps from background and 4 steps from our scenario, and then we have the after hook. These hooks can have the knowledge of the scenario it is getting applied on. We have to do is just provide the scenario here and put something in the log, say scenario name, and we'll execute the test runner. And at the before and after, this will have the name of the scenario as well. We can enable tags on before and after. So we can do it with, so one we have for smoke, and let's have this one for nightly. And when we run our test case runner, so we'll have only before, since we are executing for smoke test. Let's observe the output. We have got before hook as it was tagged to smoke test, but we didn't have any after hook because the tag was for the nightly build on the after. We can use background to do the same action, but if we need some cleanup to be done, it is better to use before and after hooks. Like we are loading a Chrome driver before testing a scenario on web, so it is a good idea to initialize web driver in before, and in after we destroy that. Background is more advised for business stakeholders where they can directly put the test steps and verify as it is visible in the feature file. We have been looking at the Cucumber execution results in console. It is quite difficult to share this result with the team members or the business stakeholders. It would be great if we can have the execution result in a file. For this, we have to use the plugin attribute of Cucumber options. We specify first the file type, say HTML, colon, and the directory the way we want. So we'll say in target reports HTML. Let's give it a run. Do Maven test. That will execute our test runner file. Let's open the file in browser. In this we have the feature, the documentation that we put in the feature file, the background and the scenario. Since it ran successfully, we have it green. Otherwise, if there is an error, we'll have it in red line. The other supported format where reports are JSON. With JSON, we need to specify the file name like this. We'll give it a run. Let's refresh reports. We've got a JSON file here. Similarly, we can put another file type, that is XML. Now let's talk about the data tables. Data tables provide us a way to provide more data set to the test steps and allow us to write reusable test scenarios. We will go through how we will use data tables in a future file. We will extend a same scenario for adding an employee. In the given condition, we will not specify any data, but we'll specify a data table which starts with a pipe. So since we are talking about the employee, we will add an employee. So the name of the employee is Amar. We put a pipe in the next attribute, that is salary, and we'll remove this and make sure we close the data table with a pipe. And let's put a tag to this scenario, data table, and we'll take this data table and first put here in the tags so that we execute only this scenario. We'll give it a run. Since this is the only test condition which we didn't have a glue code for, and Cucumber plugin has generated a stub for us. And here is the difference from the normal one that we had earlier. We have a data table as an argument to a step. It is always a good practice to have a specific test file for a separate feature. Since we have put everything in one, we'll use the same test step definition. I'll remove this code and the exception here. The data that we get from here is a list of a string. The elements on the list would be Amar and 30,000. Once we have the step definition defined, so for this data table, we'll define a list of type string, call it an employee list or employee. We'll pull this from data table dot as list, and we can use for each for looping through the elements, or we can use streams. So for this example, I'm using streams. Let me know in comment section if you want a session on streams. So this will print out the element of the list. We can also do is we can create from this data table. Let's execute the test case. Let's observe the output here. As we have mentioned that in the tag that we want to execute for data table tag, and that was put on scenario for flavor 4. And this is the log from our constructor of step definition. These three test steps are from our background. These two are the logs that we have put in our data table test step for this step, and here we are verifying. Another way of representing data table is with list of string. In this example, for flavor 4, we did was list of string. This represents as a list of string. This is the first index of the list, and each line defines a list that is having name on the first index and salary on the second index. We can have any number of data here, call it flavor 5, and I have a list of employees. List of employees, and we'll take it as a list of string. From here on, it's very easy. To get the data elements, we need to loop twice. So again we have a list now, so we'll again and employee data. If we run this scenario with list of string, let's analyze the output here. This is the tag that we have put on our flavor 5 list of string. This is the log for our constructor for step definition. These three came from our background, and this came from our step where we had a data table which is of type list of string. Now let's discuss the last data table type we have, that is list of maps. Again, we will make a copy of this, and first of all change the tag to list of map, and we make it flavor 6. We'll change this definition to say I have a list of employees in a key value pair, and we specify the headers for each, name and salary. Let's run this scenario. We can do it by putting a tag here for list of maps. This will give us the stub because we don't have a step definition defined for the new case. So we'll do list of map data table as maps. So we'll iterate over this list using streams. We can do, once we have an element that is of a type map, so we can loop through the map. So entry employee map dot entry set, and do sysout employee dot get value. So let's give it a run. Let's observe the output. The new thing that we have got is key and value pair for each table element. Let's discuss what we have here and how it translates into a list of map. In our previous example for list of string, each row defines an element in the list, and each row itself is a list of string. So in this case, each row again defines a list element, but for each row the data element is taken as key and value pair. So key is always the header that we have defined in this data table, and the value is for each element of the list. This ends the discussion on data tables. Here we discussed list of strings, list of strings, and list of maps. Let's discuss the scenario outline. Scenario outline is very similar to a scenario with data table that we have discussed before. Using this, we can add the expected output in the scenario and compare the outcome of each input in the same scenario execution. The difference here is that we have a placeholders instead of the values provided directly in the scenario step. The data set is represented by a table defined as examples. Let's write a scenario outline and we'll discuss this in detail. Scenario outline, we'll say calculate employee salary. Even I have salary. We put the placeholders in angle brackets. So I say salary and employee, and I have the tax percent, tax when I calculate the salary after tax, then should return final salary, and then we define with examples. Now let's write the data set for the scenario outline. The table headers should match with salary, tax, and final salary. So we'll start with the pipe, put salary, tax, and final salary, and end it with the pipe. We have the sample data set ready. In this, the name of the columns that we have provided in the data set should match exactly with the one we have in the given test step. So like salary, tax, and final salary should match with the one that we have here. Let's write the test step definition for this. Or before we write that, let's go through the implementation for calculating the tax. It will be calculated like this. So we have calculate salary method in our employee service. Now the implementation of this calculate salary method is quite straightforward. We have our scenario outline ready. Now let's execute this scenario with a tag @outline, which we have here. Since we had two dataset present, it executed the scenarios twice, and we had two scenarios, 8 steps. Since none of these were implemented, we had this stub which we can copy and put it in our salary step definition. Let's quickly implement them. Till now we have done is we have set the gross salary and the tax percent for given test steps that we have, and in when we are calculating the salary and setting it to take home salary, and in then we will assert the values that we are getting from then test step. So we'll use assert from org.junit dot assert equals expected take home and the actual take home salary. Let's change the variable name here. Let's execute the test again. Now let's analyze what we have here in the console. Since we executed for @outline tag, so we had two scenarios tagged with this, and we see this constructor log here. This is because we have put a log in our constructor, and we see it twice because for every data set the scenario is executed again, so that's why it creates a new instance every time for each data set, and we have 8 steps which passed successfully. This calls the end of part 2. In this session, we discussed about advanced concepts of Cucumber like tagging, execution with multiple tags, executing a specific test case with a tag from command prompt. That will be very helpful when we write a pipeline script. We learned about background, hook, report, how to pretty format a response. We also talked about data tables and scenario outline. In the next session, we will talk about the API automation using REST assured. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you.